Okay, into the home stretch now. Last two sessions of the day here, day 2 at Sustainability Live. Still got a great crowd here in the room and obviously our virtual audience as well. Thank you for staying with us, or if you're watching this on demand, hello. It was interesting actually, because normally I ask the panelists to sit in certain chairs, and I didn't this time. And it was interesting to see how they were going to go about picking which ones they were going to sit in. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, starting off furthest away from me. Bal, why don't you introduce yourself, your name, where you're from, and what it is you're doing here today.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Scott, for the intro. My name's Balwinder Dhoot, and I work in the Food and Drink Federation, which is a business representative organisation for food and drink manufacturing businesses. And my role there is Director of Sustainability. And I want to talk a bit about what our industry is doing on sustainability and some of the work we're doing to help them.
My name's Loiselle. I work for, there's an incredible echo right here, but I work for Earthwatch Europe, and we work with communities and corporations empowering people to understand, monitor, and work in their environment. We do a lot of citizen science, but we also do a lot of environmental assistance and consulting.
And I'm Anna Pierce. I'm Tate & Lyle's Director of Sustainability. And with the help of our panelists, have been reimagining Tate & Lyle's sustainability program to match our ambitions and the needs of our customers.
Okay, thank you. And today, obviously, we're talking about how to strengthen climate resilience in the supply chain. This session, we're going to explore the main opportunities that collaborations across the supply chain present to ensure that farmers, ingredient suppliers, and food and drink producers are embedding more sustainable practices. And kicking us off, I'm going to pick on Bal. Bal, starting with you, what role does the Food and Drink Federation play in all of this? You know, to what extent is sustainability a growing concern for your membership?
Okay, so I'm going to refer to the FDF, which is our initials, instead of spelling it out each time. So we have around kind of 900 kind of members and kind of businesses who are engaged with us in some way or other. And as I touched on, we're represent manufacturing businesses, and we provide support and guidance on regulation, etc., to them and advice. But the other thing we do is we convene where we know there's an issue that the industry on its own won't be able to deal with, like as individual businesses. And so what we're doing is, so we've got a strategy as an organisation. A key element of that is sustainability. And we've been engaging with our members over the last 6 months to develop a new sustainability strategy, sort of aiming for some targets up to 2030. And where we are so far, we've got kind of 5 pillars to this strategy, which are net zero, which is looking at scopes 1, 2, and 3. Nature recovery, so how do you increase biodiversity in the supply chain? Sort of sustainable commodities, this is about the ingredients, predominantly from across the globe. How do we make sure they come from sustainable sources? Food waste, which is pretty self-explanatory, and packaging and recycling. How do we get more circularity in kind of the packaging? So we've got this kind of 5-pillared strategy. There's a real kind of appetite to do that. We are going to be developing roadmaps with targets and kind of pathways to deliver that up to 2030. So it's a work in progress, but the industry know they need this, and our role at FDF is to kind of convene and to kind of make it happen.
Okay, and Steve, tell us a bit more about Earthwatch, what you do and how you're helping farmers to be more sustainable and have more sustainable practices.
Well, Earthwatch is focused on bringing science to all levels, and in this case to farmers. So we're working with farmers, particularly in China, to help them understand how to make their, in this case, production of stevia more sustainable, but also give them the power of monitoring the changes that occur in their farms. And it's amazing once you give the power to the farmer to understand, to be able to monitor or measure and understand the benefits that they can have in changing a practice on the environment, but also on their own bottom line, because in the end, farmers are very much focused on their bottom line. So and it's been a very successful program. And in China, we've had a pretty impressive improvement over the last few years, but also here in the UK, working with farmers in Ireland, in the Netherlands. But I would say the project in China has been particularly important to show what can happen once you get everyone on the same playing field.
Okay, thank you. And now, Anna, people of a certain age, like myself, and coming from the UK, would automatically associate Tate & Lyle with sugar. But of course, as Steve mentioned, you're talking about stevia and all these other kind of ingredients and sweeteners. So we know that your business has evolved, if you like. But as the sort of the third wheel in this machine here, what are your responsibilities to suppliers and as a supplier?
I think, so Tate & Lyle, I'm part of Tate & Lyle PLC. We divested our sugar business a little over a decade ago, but we're in the sweetener space, stevia being one of our product offerings to our customers. I think we play this really unique role, right? So we're meeting the needs of CPGs that are ultimately meeting consumers' needs, while at the same time, we can connect back through the supply chain to the farmers. So there's this connection point of being able to relate those CPG needs and desires and customer expectations back to, well, what does that mean on farm? And is that intermediary the role that we can play in helping to make partnerships thrive, and also making sure that we have ambitious targets and goals as an individual company who obviously is serving a variety of customers globally. I think the benefits of the stevia program and all of our sustainable agriculture programs is exactly what Stephen pointed out. So it's not about adopting a particular regenerative agriculture practice and saying, this is sustainable, we've done it, this is over, this was a great project, on to the next. It's very much thinking about the farmers' livelihoods, right? The practice change isn't sustainable if the farmers aren't benefiting economically and if the communities aren't benefiting along with those regenerative agriculture practices. So it's kind of a two-point solution that you have to meet them where they are. And I think for us, Earthwatch being able to give us the framework and the partnership to say, we need to start at ground zero. We need to start at farmer education and how to take a soil sample and what does that mean, and then connect back up to what does that mean to our goals? What does that mean to the organizations that we're a part of? How can we collaborate across those broader food and drink organizations? And then what does that mean to our customers and ultimately consumers? If one of those pieces of that puzzle isn't in place, these programs just quite frankly aren't successful.
Yeah, and we've seen that in the past in some programs where there's a launch to make things sustainable. There's let's say methodologies or approaches provided to the farmers, and they might run with it for a year or two. But if they don't buy in, if they don't see the benefit all around, they abandon it pretty quickly. Especially in industrial farms, is an investment made where that they're going to be producing this, whatever it is, corn, and they're going to be producing it for decades. In small farms, they make a decision in January what they're going to produce, what they're going to plant in February. So there's got to be a very clear, long-term objective that they buy into.
So due to the sort of cyclical nature of agriculture, is it difficult to make longer term changes?
Yeah, very much so, very much so. And that's where having a partnership with local farmer associations, with local farmers, with local scientists, with the buyers and the people that are going to be purchasing this product is really fundamental, because you give them a long-term vision, because that's what they need, because most farmers are working at a very limited margin. So.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that goes back to actually using the data that you get. So our program can't be prescriptive. Not everyone's going to plant cover crops and have it be successful and have better yield and decreased environmental impact. Some of those farms aren't successful in the first year, and it's thinking through what's the data telling us, where's the biggest opportunity for impact, both economically to the farmers and to us, quite frankly, from an environmental impact perspective, and going back and kind of retooling that as the farmers are in their journey. So for us, we have a stevia program. Farmers have been farming stevia for 40 years, corns thousands. So the difference between, Stephen, to your point, that industrialized process of corn production in our sustainable corn program versus small shareholder farms is you can't have that kind of cookie cutter approach. And I think that perspective that you've brought and that Nanjing Agricultural University brought, that's our partner on the ground, that level of expertise lets us look at the program and say, that worked really well. We should expand that, and we should trial that, and we should pilot this, and let's take some time and make sure it really works, and we didn't just have a really great year because there wasn't an extreme weather event or it was just an anomaly.
A little luck helped.
Yeah, you kind of have to have the real secret of the sauce there a few years to be able to say, okay, this is successful. Let's really go after this. Patience isn't always my virtue, so that's been a good lesson learned for me.
And we see that amongst our membership, where you have a supply chain where the relationship with the farmer goes back, decades or through families, and really that's where there's more confidence to kind of work with the business to think about, okay, how do we experiment? We've got the investment coming from the manufacturer who's prepared to be patient, to test things out, learn and try that. So where you have that strong relationship, you're probably seeing more progress. Where there's kind of more sort of disconnect between the supply chain, then it is a lot harder.
Okay, and that brings me to the next question, actually. I mean, during tough economic times, and times are pretty tough right now, I would say. Does it get more difficult to sell the concept of sustainability? I'm going to ask all of you that, but actually, Belle, starting with you, and obviously you can draw on the experiences of FDF's members.
Yeah.
Is it more difficult to sell the concept when times are hard?
So in terms of selling, I'll talk about selling to the kind of business owners, right? So they need to buy into it because sustainability, it requires investment, and it requires investment of people and money. So if you've had a situation where you've had kind of Brexit in the UK, the COVID pandemic, Russian invasion of Ukraine, massive spikes in inflation, like these businesses are firefighting, and that reduces bandwidth, and some longer term stuff might have taken a backseat during that period, or you'd expect it to. But what we've seen is, well, firstly, some of these crises are weather generated. We were talking backstage about some of the temperatures in Italy this summer, and that has an impact on supply chains. So even just from a business risk perspective, you need to be doing something about that. But I've been in this job since February, and what I've seen is during that crisis period, when I look back, the members have been working on sustainability programs constantly, even throughout that crisis period where they've been kind of dealing with that. And so they take it seriously, they know it's important, and it'd be important to their customers. It'd be important because if you're not on the front foot, government regulation will come in, and that may not be that may be a bit blunt and less sophisticated than what your own business plan can be. But I think in terms of selling it, they get it. They signed off on our kind of main policy committee, which is kind of all the big major kind of manufacturers. They signed off on our sustainability strategy. Very happy with it. They fully endorse it. And it's because they get it. They want to do something in this space. They know they need to. And they're businesses, but they're run by people at the end of the day. They understand the need to kind of act and do the right thing.
And same question to you, Steve. I mean, you alluded to it earlier, like you're talking about, educating, if you like, farmers in China, and selling the concept of sustainability being a good thing and long-term having business benefits as well. So what's your experience there?
I would build on what Bao was just saying. If you consider that farmers tend to stick to the knowledge that they've had and that they've probably been passed on from their parents, if you can expand that knowledge base and get them to buy, to see with their own hands, see with their own eyes the benefits of doing some of these processes, and see in the yield, for example, the benefits of doing some of these processes in a more sustainable way, then that creates this critical mass that then they'll do it next year certainly, but then probably they'll influence all the farms around them to do it, and slowly and surely we'll get from that little nut, we'll get a critical mass that'll go to all the, because we're talking for the stevia production, we're talking really small farms. We're talking, I would say mom and pop, but it's more like grandmother and grandfather farms. The average age is like 70. So they're not large. So to convince many farmers to do this, you have to have a certain group of farms where they're completely convinced, they see the benefits, and then they can convince everyone else about it. So it's a long process. It's not instantaneous. Getting back to it, Anna would like to see it tomorrow. It's a process that takes time, just because these farmers don't move at the speed of light. So
Yeah.
I hope there's no farmers in the room, and some farmers may work at the speed of light, but
All the farmers were in yesterday.
Okay.
Apart from one. Yeah. Stevia.
Stevia.
Anna, why don't you explain what stevia is?
Oh, yeah. So stevia is a plant-based sweetener, and the stevia seedlings are incredibly important in terms of the health of the plant. So it's seedlings planted in the ground each year that then we process into sweeteners that you would find in a lot of beverages. Quite frankly, it's an alternative to sugar.
With 0 calories.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Okay. Going back to the conversation there. So Anna, what's Tate and Lyle's role and responsibility in selling the concept of sustainability? How can you encourage those farmers to be more sustainable, that ultimately makes you more sustainable?
I mean, I think internally we truly believe it. So it's part of our company's purpose. It's, we talk about having it infused in operations, but it actually is. So there's a consistency with the farmers that they're hearing the same message from me and my team through Earthwatch and our partners. They're hearing the same exact message coming from our procurement team as they talk to them about what the contract looks like for the growing years. So there's an incredible amount of consistency and education that has to happen with any third party that you're working with that's touching multiple business operations. It can't just be, my sustainability program and think that that's going to be successful. I think with the farmers, there is a dose of reality. So we say arm the farmers with information. We are cautious that we partner with subject matter experts. I'm not an agronomist. I have no business advising farmers on what practice change they should adopt and what the impact's going to be. So I think you kind of have to know your place in the space to really gain their confidence and say, okay, you brought the right people. They know what they're doing. I've seen this happen year over year. They're making more money. They have better yield. The flood wiped out my crops. Maybe this year I'm going to listen, and next year I might participate. We'll see, right? It's a very long process. But then there's also life. We had pilot farms that we couldn't get samples back and forth in China in the right amount of time, so we couldn't roll up the results from that pilot, so we're repeating that pilot. We had farmers in our corn program in the States that wanted to try cover crops. They had supply chain issues after COVID and couldn't get the cover crops, or they couldn't get the workforce labor to actually plant the cover crops. So there are these moments of humanity where we have to follow along with where the farmers are at and listen to them on where they need help and where they say, you know what, I know how to take a soil sample now. I just need help with reviewing the results. So tell me what to do. Now I can do this part on my own. And for farmers that are further along on the journey, I really wanted to try it, but my farm couldn't do that this year, and here's why. And us helping to think through with our partners, what does that look like for next year? Is this a permanent barrier? Is this something that we just need to be more realistic about our expectations? So I think we have to be a little bit open-minded and transparent about, we didn't get that sample. We wanted those samples, but we didn't get it, and that's okay. We're gonna try again. So it's that longer-term commitment
It can't be a flash in the pan, so it can't be, we're doing sustainable agriculture this year, that was great, we got great results, high five, and then we leave town, but we still want to buy your stevia, and we want you to do everything we said. You really have to have a long-term commitment to see this thing through.
And oftentimes you're also changing a culture. I mean,
Right.
there's a lot of, in different parts, even Europe, farmers aren't used to looking at certain aspects of their activities as we would like them to look, not just as a recording. Simply recording that information is not something that is often performed. And so getting them to do that, at first it's like, really? This is absolutely, do you really need to know this information? Well, yes. And then next year it's not so painful. But now we want you to measure the biodiversity. Really? You want us to? But every year we build a little more into the program, and some things work, some things don't. But it's a long journey.
And what role does technology, or what role can technology play in this? Presumably technology is helping some of this reporting, especially when you're talking about dealing with suppliers, for instance, who might be the other side of the world. Bal, maybe if you can start with this, how is technology helping when it comes to measuring and monitoring things like scope 3, for instance?
So I think technology will definitely help in terms of monitoring, data analysis. I don't think it's a silver bullet on its own, because if you look at the supply chain, let's say from our members, you can be a big manufacturing business. Your supply chain is hundreds, potentially thousands of small, medium. Actually, there'll be small enterprises. Farms, etc. So, having the data is fine, but what you need to do is set up a kind of structure in your own organisation where sustainability is embedded into your practices throughout your supply chain, and you can have the best data collection and analysis in the world. Unless you've got that kind of structural change going through the supply chain, it won't make that much difference. And I would say, as well as kind of data, and I touched on the kind of structural and kind of the focus that you need, the cultural change you need in organisations. You probably also need government, you need kind of a stable, sensible regulatory environment from government, because we talked about kind of the long-term game here, and with that, if you don't have government as a partner who's going to give you that stability to make those long-term decisions, it makes it a lot harder.
And what kind of challenge does it represent in a country like the UK, for instance, where government changes every few years, 4 or 5 years, whatever it is, where in other nations, and some nations that we've talked about already today, they do not have that change of leadership. They can maybe plan 30 or 40 years in advance, whereas here, or in more democratically elected government, shall we say, they might have challenges where those regulations are maybe changing, or the view on that is changing. So how does that impact?
So that does have an impact, and we've left the EU. So basically, we are rewriting and redrawing our whole kind of environmental farming regulatory landscape. So we are going through a period of incredible transition, probably like we haven't seen since joining the EU. So that creates a lot of uncertainty. And I think for the FDF, our role is to kind of engage with government to make sure that they are thinking through the consequences of the regulation and the impacts of what they're going to do. We are helping to shape it and influencing it in a way that will deliver the outcomes. And before this job, I was a civil servant, so I've worked on the other side. And good policy making, you need to kind of investigate what you're doing. You need to understand all the impacts. And our role is to make sure that we are feeding that information into government. In terms of kind of the change, the kind of election cycle, so we need to engage with all parties. We need to engage with the government. We need to engage with the opposition, so they understand the consequences of bringing in changes to something which requires long-term stability, like the new farming regulation that's coming in, the new support mechanisms, which are very environmentally focused. Again, we've touched on the fact that they will take time to bed in. It's a massive change to what people have had before, and to have those changing with each election cycle, it'd be a disaster. They would fail. So our job is to try and influence, and our members, they have the relationship with farmers. They're able to tell us what is working, what's not, and we engage on that basis.
I think, if I can just add, I think also having an informed public makes a huge difference here, because it's the public in the UK in particular, it's the public who's pushing for certain changes across. We do a lot of work in rivers and across the UK. There's a very strong push from the public to do something. And if you can inform the public and empower the public, then even if it changes from one side to the other, you're not, in the end, it's the public who's going to be holding the government responsible rather than the opposite. So,
I think too, as one of the many companies that this is kind of happening to, right? There's FDF where we can all collectively funnel thoughts, where we have a cohesive, coordinated response to the newest regulation, the newest disclosure. What about this? This is proposed. There's this tidal wave of requirements coming down for companies, and being able to collectively think and learn from each other. Other companies are finding loopholes we didn't find, and we're thinking about things that maybe no one else had thought about. And collectively, that response back is incredibly important. But I also think you can't kind of take your foot off the gas and say, well, we're going to figure this out. We're going to wait until this is finalized. It's starting to digest it now to say, okay, if this goes through, what are we going to have to do here? What are the resources it's going to take to be able to hit that disclosure, or maybe be ambitious and disclose early? Like, what does good look like? What does great look like? And it's not always the same answers. And I think even in the moments where regulation and disclosures are pushing for more, right? That more comes to us. And we can't do it alone. We do rely on governments. We rely on other entities to lift everyone up in this sustainability journey, right? Companies can't write the check entirely, and neither can consumers. But when we start to really kind of peel that back a little bit, it's why are we doing what we're doing? And how important is this going to be to my company? And we're getting pushed by consumers, our customers, our investors. So it's not just government saying you have to do this, and disclosure bodies saying, boy, we'd really like to know about this whole new topic next year. We have to do this whether or not the government's ready for us. I think it's a matter of collaborating to get to the point where the government comes back and says, we've heard that feedback and we're really going to think about this. And we've seen that with some of the greenhouse gas protocols on land use change, right? We were supposed to see it 2 years ago. The pilot feedback was overwhelming. We had more to think through. There was more work to do. And I think that's an important part of the process, but we can't kind of all sit back and say, yeah, that's a couple years away. And really still be able to look ourselves in the mirror and say, yes, we're a responsible company and we're doing the right thing.
Good answer. Okay, I just want to ask you one more thing. I suppose when it comes to sustainability, what is the biggest challenge from your own perspectives that you face right now? So the biggest challenge that you're facing, Bal?
Some of it is kind of uncertainty around government and kind of what's coming down the road. I'd say probably for our members, we are kind of in the middle of a supply chain. You've got retailers at one end, you've got kind of, the producers who are producing the ingredients at the other end, who are very fragmented. You've got kind of associated industries who feed into you, kind of energy, transport. And then you're trying to be effective. You actually need to join up that whole supply chain, right? You can do your own initiatives. We've got our strategy. We could do that on our own in a silo. I think for it to be successful, we need to engage government with it. We need to engage the NGOs. We need to engage the rest of the supply chain. And that's our intention, is to kind of work. I'd say the other challenge is, for some of the big firms, they will have sustainability people on their boards. It'll be in their kind of strategies. For lots of businesses, they are just kind of living day by day, just trying to make some money. So how do you support those businesses to adopt kind of sustainability as a core part of their kind of sort of work plan and strategy? And I think that's something we need to look at. And, maybe some of that is around how larger businesses support and coach and mentor, you know, and how you make changes to supply chain, which means it's done by default. And it's just, and for FDF, it's to provide maybe guidance and things. So it's just, how do you help the people who have limited bandwidth to kind of get onto the journey?
Steve?
I think you stole my answer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I completely agree. How do you get all the partners, or first of all, how do you put people together in a partnership? But how do you get all the players, and the ones who don't have a sustainability manager, a farmer, for example, whoever, to have the means to understand what they need to do, to have a little help to go in the right direction, but also the capacity to monitor, to understand the effects of what they do. So, yeah, I mean, what he said.
You know what he said.
Yeah.
Anna?
Yeah, Bal hit that one on the head. I mean, it is. I mean, our challenge is accelerating to meet it all, right? So there's all these new requirements. We're upskilling functions that never talked about sustainability. And guess who's upskilling them? The sustainability team, who's also trying to digest the regulations and participate and drive the programs. So there's definitely a bandwidth issue that you really can't, again, stop and say, we're just going to wait a little bit. And I think it's, you know, we talk about meeting with the farmers where they're at. It's also meeting our supply chain where they're at. There's some of our customers don't have greenhouse gas targets that are public. That's part of our scope 3 emissions. That's part of our science-based target. We only succeed if they become more ambitious, and this becomes an important topic to them. And the same with our suppliers. So all of our success now has become so linked that we're all rooting for the same thing, but we still lack the momentum to say 90% of our customers and suppliers have greenhouse gas targets, and it's going to do this to our targets, and we can project that. The supply chain's not that sophisticated, so there's still just a huge amount of, well, what's the scope 1 emission that you get asked, and you're thinking, ooh, okay, how long until you set a target, and what does that look like? And it's a lot of education and work that we still have left to do. So the starting line isn't necessarily evil. Not evil, sorry. It's not evil, but it's also not even.
Slight difference.
Slight difference there.
Yeah. Okay, perfect place to finish it, I think. Thank you so much, guys, for your inputs. Bal, Steve, Anna, thank you.